Noah's Ark. The great flood that changed the world forever. Imagine living in a world where violence, corruption, and evil had become part of everyday life. Thousands of years ago, according to the book of Genesis, humanity had turned away from God. People no longer cared about justice or kindness. Instead, greed, hatred, and violence filled the earth. Seeing how deeply the world had fallen into sin, God decided that it was time to cleanse the earth with a great flood. But among all the people living at that time, one man stood apart. His name was Noah. Noah was known as a righteous and faithful man. He trusted God and tried to live an honest life even when everyone around him chose a different path. Because of Noah's faithfulness, God gave him an extraordinary mission. God told Noah that a massive flood would soon cover the entire earth. Every living thing outside the ark would perish. To preserve life, Noah was instructed to build an enormous wooden ark unlike anything the world had ever seen. The task seemed impossible. Noah had never seen a flood of such magnitude. Building such a gigantic vessel would take years of hard work, and many people mocked him. They laughed at him and thought he had lost his mind. But Noah never stopped believing. Day after day, year after year, Noah and his family continued building the ark exactly as God had instructed. When the ark was finally completed, God commanded Noah to bring his family aboard. Noah entered the ark with his wife, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives. Then came one of the most remarkable moments in the story. Animals from every kind began arriving at the ark. Birds filled the skies, wild animals crossed the fields, and creatures of every size approached the great wooden ship. Noah welcomed them inside, ensuring that life would continue after the flood. Once everyone was safely inside, God shut the door of the ark. Soon dark clouds covered the sky. Rain began to fall. It rained not for 1 day or 1 week, but for 40 days and 40 nights. At the same time, underground springs burst open, causing water to rise from beneath the earth. The floodwaters continued rising until they covered mountains, forests, villages, and cities. Everything outside the ark disappeared beneath the water. But inside the ark, Noah, his family, and the animals remained safe. For many months, the ark floated across the endless waters. Finally, the rain stopped. Slowly, the floodwaters began to recede. One day, the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But Noah still needed to know whether the land was dry enough to leave. He first sent out a raven. Later, he released a dove. The dove returned because it could not find a place to rest. Several days later, Noah sent the dove out again. This time, it returned carrying a freshly picked olive leaf in its beak. Noah knew that the floodwaters had finally begun to disappear and that trees were growing once again. After waiting a little longer, Noah released the dove one final time. The dove never returned. It had found a new home. At last, God told Noah that it was time to leave the ark. Noah, his family, and every animal stepped onto dry ground. The world was beginning again. The first thing Noah did was build an altar to thank God for protecting them through the flood. God accepted Noah's offering and made an everlasting covenant with humanity. As a sign of this promise, God placed a beautiful rainbow in the sky. The rainbow became a symbol of God's promise that he would never again destroy the whole earth with a flood. The story of Noah's Ark is more than a story about a great flood. Thousands of years ago, in the ancient land of Israel, a terrifying war was brewing. 2 fierce armies stood on opposing hills, facing each other across the valley of Elah. On one side stood the army of Israel, led by King Saul. On the other side was their bitter enemy, the Philistines. Instead of starting an all-out battle, the Philistines chose to intimidate their enemies with a psychological weapon. Out from their camp stepped their champion, a literal giant of a man named Goliath of Gath. Goliath was a monster of a warrior, standing over 9 feet tall. He wore a massive bronze helmet and heavy scale armor that weighed over 100 pounds. He carried a massive spear with a heavy iron tip, and a shield-bearer walked before him. Every single day, for 40 days, morning and evening, the giant walked out into the valley. His voice thundered across the hills as he mocked the Israelites, shouting, "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our slaves and serve us." Hearing his terrifying roars, King Saul and the entire Israelite army were completely paralyzed with fear. No soldier dared to step forward to face him. Meanwhile, far away from the battlefield, a young boy named David was tending his father's sheep in the fields of Bethlehem. He was the youngest of 8 brothers, and 3 of his older brothers were serving in King Saul's army. One day, his father, Jesse, asked David to take some roasted grain and bread to his brothers at the battle lines and see how they were doing. When David arrived at the army camp, he ran to the front lines to greet his brothers. As he was speaking with them, Goliath stepped out from the Philistine lines and began shouting his usual defiance. David watched as the Israelite soldiers trembled and ran away in fear. David was deeply disturbed and furious. He looked at the soldiers and asked, "Who is this Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God?" When David's older brothers heard him talking, they became angry and told him to go back to his sheep. But David's fearless words quickly reached King Saul, and the king immediately summoned the boy. David stood before the king and boldly said, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul looked at the young boy in disbelief and said, "You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David did not back down. He looked at the king and explained that as a shepherd, he had fought off both a lion and a bear with his bare hands to save his father's sheep. David confidently declared, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Seeing the boy's unshakable faith, King Saul finally relented. He insisted that David wear his own royal bronze helmet and heavy armor for protection. But when David put them on, he could barely walk. "I cannot go in these," David said, "because I am not used to them." So, David stripped off the heavy armor. Instead, he took his simple shepherd's staff, went down to a nearby stream, and carefully selected 5 smooth stones. He put the stones into his shepherd's pouch, took his leather sling in his hand, and walked out into the open valley to face the giant. As Goliath moved closer to the battle line, he looked down and saw David. The giant sneered with pure contempt, seeing only a handsome, unarmed teenager. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" Goliath roared, cursing David by the names of his gods. He shouted, "Come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." But David did not flinch. Looking straight up at the towering giant, his voice echoed with absolute authority through the valley. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. As Goliath lunged forward to attack, David did not run away or hide. Instead, he ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag, David pulled out a single smooth stone, placed it securely into his leather sling, and swung it with all his might. The stone flew through the air like a bullet and struck Goliath precisely in the middle of his forehead, the only vulnerable spot left exposed by his helmet. The stone sank deep into his skull. The giant instantly froze. His eyes rolled back, and like a massive falling tree, Goliath crashed face first onto the ground. David ran over, stood over the fallen giant, and pulled Goliath's own heavy sword from its sheath. With one final blow, he used the sword to cut off the giant's head. When the Philistines saw that their mighty hero was dead, they panicked and turned to flee in terror. The Israelite army raised a great, thunderous shout of victory and chased their enemies out of the land. Against all human odds, the simple shepherd boy had won the battle and saved his nation through pure faith and courage. A child, chosen by God. Thousands of years ago, in the powerful land of Egypt, a great tragedy was unfolding. The descendants of Israel had once been welcomed into the country during a time of famine. But as generations passed, they became more numerous, stronger, and prosperous. A new pharaoh rose to power, one who did not remember the kindness shown by Joseph many years before. Fear filled his heart. He believed that if the Israelites continued to grow in number, they might one day become a threat to Egypt. So Pharaoh turned them into slaves. From sunrise to sunset, the Israelites labored under the blazing sun, building magnificent cities, carrying enormous stones, and making countless bricks. Their lives became filled with pain, exhaustion, and hopelessness. Yet despite their suffering, the people continued to grow in number. Pharaoh became even more frightened. In his desperation, he issued a cruel command throughout the land. Every newborn Hebrew boy was to be thrown into the Nile River. It was during this dark time that a baby boy was born to a Hebrew family. His parents saw something special in him. They believed his life was precious and worth protecting. For 3 months they hid him in secret, praying that no Egyptian soldier would discover their child. But as the baby grew louder, hiding him became impossible. With heavy hearts, his mother carefully wove a small basket from reeds. She coated it with tar and pitch to keep the water out. Then she gently placed her son inside, wrapped him in soft cloth, kissed his forehead, and set the basket among the tall reeds along the edge of the Nile River. Nearby stood the baby's sister, Miriam. She watched from a distance, hoping and praying that God would protect her little brother. Not long afterward, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe. As she walked along the riverbank, she noticed the unusual basket floating among the reeds. Curious, she asked one of her servants to bring it to her. When she opened the basket, she found a crying baby. Instead of anger, compassion filled her heart. She immediately realized the child was one of the Hebrew babies. Yet she could not bring herself to obey her father's cruel law. At that very moment, Miriam courageously stepped forward. "Would you like me to find a Hebrew woman to care for the baby?" she asked. Pharaoh's daughter smiled and agreed. Without revealing her secret, Miriam hurried home and returned with the baby's own mother. The princess entrusted the child to her, saying, "Take care of this boy for me, and I will pay you." What appeared to be a heartbreaking farewell had become an extraordinary miracle. The child's own mother was now able to raise him safely. When he was older, she brought him back to Pharaoh's palace. The princess adopted him as her own son and gave him the name Moses, because she had drawn him out of the water. Growing up inside the royal palace, Moses received the finest education in Egypt. He learned the wisdom of scholars, the skills of leadership, and the customs of the greatest empire of his time. But although he wore the clothes of an Egyptian prince, Moses never forgot who he truly was. Deep within his heart remained the cries of his own people, the Hebrews who continued to suffer under slavery. Little did anyone know that this child, once hidden in a basket among the reeds, would one day stand before Pharaoh himself. He would challenge the mightiest king on earth. He would witness astonishing miracles. And through him, God would begin one of the greatest rescue stories in human history.
Years passed, and Moses grew into a strong, intelligent, and respected man within Pharaoh's palace. He enjoyed every privilege of royalty, yet his heart remained deeply connected to the Hebrew people. One day, Moses left the palace to see the conditions of his own people. What he witnessed broke his heart. Hebrew slaves were forced to work under the scorching Egyptian sun. Guards shouted harsh commands, while workers struggled to carry heavy stones and make endless bricks. Their backs were scarred from whips, and their cries echoed across the land. Then Moses saw something he could not ignore. An Egyptian overseer was brutally beating a helpless Hebrew slave. Looking around and seeing no one nearby, Moses stepped in. In a moment of anger, he struck the Egyptian, killing him. He buried the body in the sand, hoping no one would ever discover what had happened. The next day, Moses returned and found two Hebrew men arguing. As he tried to stop the fight, one of them replied, "Who made you our ruler and judge? Are you planning to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" Fear rushed through Moses. His secret had been exposed. Soon the news reached Pharaoh. Furious, the king ordered that Moses be captured and executed. Without hesitation, Moses fled Egypt. Leaving behind wealth, honor, and the royal palace, he escaped into the vast wilderness. Alone, exhausted, and uncertain of his future, he traveled across the endless desert until he reached the land of Midian. There, beside a well, Moses met the daughters of a local shepherd. When other shepherds tried to drive them away, Moses defended them and helped water their flock. Their father welcomed Moses into his home. In time, Moses married Zipporah, one of the shepherd's daughters, and settled into a quiet life as a shepherd himself. For 40 years, Moses cared for sheep among the rugged mountains and lonely deserts of Midian. The prince of Egypt had become a humble shepherd, yet God had not forgotten him. One ordinary day, while leading his flock near Mount Horeb, Moses noticed something extraordinary. A bush was on fire, but although flames surrounded it, the bush was not burning up. Curious, Moses walked closer. Then a voice called from within the flames, "Moses, Moses." Startled, Moses answered, "Here I am." The voice replied, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, because the place where you are standing is holy ground." Trembling with awe, Moses removed his sandals and bowed his head. The voice continued, "I am the God of your fathers. I have seen the suffering of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries, and I know their pain. Now I have come to rescue them." Then came the words that would change history forever. "I am sending you to Pharaoh. You will lead my people, out of Egypt. Moses was overwhelmed. "Who am I to stand before Pharaoh?" he asked. "How could I possibly bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God answered with a simple but powerful promise. "I will be with you." Still uncertain, Moses asked, "If the people ask who sent me, what should I tell them?" God replied, "I am who I am. Tell them that the great I am has sent you." Even then, Moses doubted himself. "I'm not a good speaker," he confessed. "People will not listen to me." God reminded Moses that he is the creator of every human mouth and promised to help him speak. To strengthen Moses' faith, God performed miraculous signs. Moses threw down his shepherd's staff, and it instantly became a living snake. When God commanded him to pick it up again, it became a staff once more. Then God told Moses to place his hand inside his cloak. When he pulled it out, it was covered with a terrible skin disease. After placing it inside again, his hand was completely restored. These miracles would prove that God's power was with him. Finally, God appointed Moses' brother Aaron to speak alongside him before Pharaoh. The time of hiding was over. The shepherd who once fled Egypt in fear would now return with courage, not as a prince, not as a warrior, but as the chosen servant of Almighty God. His greatest journey was about to begin.